on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey guys, welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
You are?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Last time I looked.
You'd think after a while we would stop telling people who we are, but here we are anyway.
It just feels natural.
It does.
Yeah. Well, if this is the first time they're ever listened and they're like, I wonder what these two dumbasses' names are.
Okay. Dylan, we have some very special shout outs for the show.
Okay, let's do it.
We want to wish a very happy birthday to Rebecca Chadwick in Arkansas.
Okay, happy birthday, Rebecca.
Her husband, Eddie, a great husband, reached out to Mountain Murders. He explained that Rebecca is a huge fan. He said she's our biggest fan.
Wow.
I know, right?
She's like 9 foot tall.
And she has a birthday. You're stupid. So you're ruining Rebecca's birthday
no,
shout out.
This is what Rebecca wants.
So, Rebecca, happy birthday from Heather and Dylan.
Yes, happy birthday, and we hope you have a really great birthday.
Okay. And then we also have a happy birthday shout out to my bestie, Julie.
Happy birthday, Julie.
Her birthday will be in just a few days.
Yes, you got to see your bestie yesterday.
I did. So I want to wish her a happy birthday. We're not getting any younger, girl, but that's okay.
Yeah, when you start getting together with your friends and talking about ailments, that's when you know you've arrived.
Today, I went on a walk with my other bestie, right? And we spent like 30 minutes discussing our various ailments.
Yeah.
And that we're just old.
Yeah, when you wake up hurt.
Yeah.
You don't know what happened.
She was like, I can't even exercise. She was like, every time I try to even like exercise, I hurt myself.
Yeah. You have to recover for like a week.
Yes.
Yeah.
It happens.
It happens to the best of us. So here we are on this wonderful day. It was beautiful.
Aries season.
Nice. Lots of sunshine.
Gorgeous outside today.
Yeah.
Hopefully wherever you are, you had a lovely spring day as well.
Yeah, I hope you did. And I can't get enough of it. And I can't wait for spring.
Now, I know we typically reserve true crime news for the middle of the week, but this was too good to pass up. I'm going to say, it's juicy. South Carolina begins offering firing squad executions for death row inmates.
So we can, if I'm choosing my execution, my method of execution, I can pick firing squad now?
If you're in South Carolina, which is one of 4 states offering firing squad, it's now an option for prisoners on death row. Some legislation passed in May of 2021 to expand the state's means of execution. They have completed a $53,600 renovation of their capital punishment facility to allow for firing squad executions.
Wow.
Now, the chamber includes a chair where inmates will sit if they choose to be executed by firing squad. It's in the corner of a room away from any kind of, electrical current. The electric chair, blah, 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 cannot be moved. They would essentially strap these folks into the chair. Then they have bullet-resistant glass installed between the witness room and the death chamber. The firing squad chair is metal. It has restraints, as I mentioned, and is surrounded by some protective equipment. It faces a wall, and there is a rectangular opening about 15 feet away. Now, this new method would call for 3 firing squad members, which would all be volunteers from the South Carolina Department of Corrections. They would stand behind a wall with their rifles aimed at the inmate through an open portal, which will be obscured from view of the witness room. So it's really a small aim point.
Yeah.
That they would be shooting at this really tiny aim point. that kind of is placed over the person's heart.
So this is kind of a modern interpretation of the age-old method of shooting someone on the firing squad, right?
Yeah, there was actually a senator named Dick Harpootlian.
I'm sure you said that right.
That's how it's spelled, is Harpootlian.
Nice.
He introduced the firing squad option, arguing that the method is humane and the least painful means of execution.
Well, somebody gets a clean shot in, right?
Yes.
I would think it's more humane, honestly, because with the lethal injection, they do a series of kind of a cocktail, and they do a series of medications, but those can go wrong. There's multiple reports of those going horribly wrong because one of the last medications they give you is very painful. Makes you feel like you're on fire, basically, inside your body. And so, I honestly, if I had to choose a clean heart shot, I think I would pick that, personally.
The other 3 states that are offering this option are Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Utah. 3 executions by firing squad have been carried out in the U.S. since 1977, and those were all in Utah.
Wow, wasn't it the Executioner's song? That guy who was in that story wanted to be killed, but everybody kept intervening on his behalf for like his rights and stuff, and he even offered to pay for the ammunition, I believe.
So that is by Norman Mailer, and I did read that story, but it's been some years ago, and it does take place in Utah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow, I thought that was in Texas. Okay, that makes sense. Interesting. So this is no surprise. I will find the full story and give you all the deets in the very near future. But yeah, that one of the countries that make the key ingredients of the lethal injection, which I think is the most used form of execution in this country, I'm just guessing, quit making it or quit making it available because they didn't agree with capital punishment, or their government that they are under does not agree with capital punishment. So this is no surprise that they're having to literally revive these older methods. So bring back the hangings, son. Build some gallows.
Are we doing some public hangings?
Yeah, do it right out there. Make your kids go watch. Like, that's what happens if you don't listen.
Oh, Lord.
Maybe not. Don't bring the kids. Can that be one of our adult-only spaces?
One of our adult-only spaces.
The execution ring?
Yes.
Okay. People will still be like, why can't I bring my 3-year-old in here?
My toddler needs to see this.
Okay, well, that's very interesting, and that kind of broke while we were discussing, getting ourselves together here and recording. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I felt like I should bring that up. Maybe give our folks something to think about over the next couple of days. And when we return for our midweek on Wednesday, maybe we can further discuss.
Oh, yeah. Got some homework.
Yeah, if you have some thoughts about that, email us, mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. We would like to hear from you all. Let us know what you think about this new or maybe old but newly revisited method of execution.
I'm for capital punishment. If someone's, definitely guilty of whatever horrible crime, the only part of it that makes me mad is it doesn't happen faster. Honestly, I don't think people should get to spend years on death row after they murder, mutilate, destroy, families and people. So, there's that. And some people disagree, and that's fine.
Sucking at the resource teat.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you've been scheduled to be put to death, you should go through your appellate courts in a, quick fashion, 6-8 months. It should be the end of it.
Yeah, I'm really torn about the death penalty. I mean, there are times that I feel it's appropriate, but we've had so many innocent folks die.
Well, that's
and then evidence points to their innocence. That's very disappointing.
Well, obviously that's the downside, but you would think with modern day forensics and DNA and all that should happen less often, because oftentimes these people were the only evidence was 4 or 5 eyewitnesses, and we all know what eyewitness accounts will get you in the court.
Not a damn thing.
5 different versions of the truth. But no, yes, innocent man killed, that's horrible. Is that reason enough to stop the whole system? I don't know. I don't know. That's a really tough discussion.
It's a big moral discussion, you know,
It is.
ethical. Could get into some real philosophical conversations about that. But we don't have time for that now. We have to talk about murder. Are you ready, Dylan?
I am ready, and you have a very interesting story today.
Let's saddle up, folks. Hall Rose was described as a keen judge of human nature, according to Horace Keppert, who wrote about him in My Southern Highlands. A U.S. deputy marshal, Rose was able to arrest men without any kind of stir. Most folks would be infuriated if served with an arrest warrant, but Rose had a straightforward nature about him. He treated most men respectfully, even suggesting he would leave the handcuffs off if the alleged perpetrator would just come along quietly.
Oh, so as long as you cooperate with him, he's not going to rough you up and all that crap that some cops do, right?
Now, there was a time in Appalachian history when moonshining and bootlegging was only an offense against the Internal Revenue Service, known as tax dodging. Trading contraband liquor was considered smuggling or bootlegging as we know it here in the mountains. A lot of the old-timers who made liquor were given good deals by the courts, mainly federal officials who realized that it was part of their cultural heritage and tradition.
Oh, wow.
For example, if a reputable man was caught distilling and the judge learned he didn't have anyone else at home capable of handling the farm work, the judge might parole him until winter so that man could go back home and work his crops. This way, a man could still be able to provide for his family and in most cases would return to serve the sentence when the time came without any problems or issues.
Well, I mean, that's very interesting. I think they could apply some of that nowadays to, it's not exactly a victimless crime, but, it wasn't a violent crime and all that. And instead of destroying this family and causing other issues, that's going to fall on the lap of local resources and the county would have to deal with it. You let him keep his affairs in order and still serve his time. So what do you think about that?
I think it makes sense.
I think it's fair, and I think it being applied to a crime like this kind of makes sense.
However, there were still some of the mountain men who refused to cooperate. They were professionals in every sense of the word. Some might even be called desperados or outlaws, men who already had blood on their hands. They acted with reckless and ruthless intent. And these are the kinds of men who did not settle a dispute with words or fistfights, but rather knives or pistols. Hall Rose, despite his usual even temperament, was known to have a fierce attitude when need be. He had killed men before in the line of duty, stating, well, needed to be done.
Wow.
So in other words, don't cross Hall Rose. In his youth, Rose had been wild as a buck, as they say, like a lot of the others, but he eventually settled down. He became a deputy in Swain County, North Carolina. Hall Rose lived at Cooper's boarding house, where folks knew him to be a jolly feller, Dylan.
So don't take his kindness for weakness.
Exactly.
If he needs to break bad on your ass, he will with authority.
Exactly.
Authorita.
When Rose became a lawman, he went to great lengths, some might say above and beyond, to hunt down offenders. One might say manhunting was a sport for Hall Rose. He took great pride in his ability to track down a man and make an arrest. Now, this story we're telling you today takes place in Swain County, North Carolina. It is in the far western corner of North Carolina. There's a population of about 13, maybe 14,000 residents in the entire county.
Yeah, there's a very important reason for that, right?
Well, the county seat is Bryson City, and there are 4 rivers that flow through the mountainous terrain of Swain County: the Nantahala, Oconaluftee, Tuckasegee, and the Little Tennessee River. Now, to talk about Swain County, we have to discuss the fact that, a huge percentage of the county is now government land, federal land. So you have very few, miles, if you will, that are occupied, that are not considered like national park land.
Yeah, you pointed this out to me, and I did not realize that such a large swath of Swain County's area is a national park in some capacity or another. So there's very limited space that is privately owned land, right?
There are several national protected areas consisting of the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the Nantahala National Forest, and the Cherokee Indian Reservation, where the Eastern Band of Cherokee reside, all part of Swain County. So, yeah, you have very little land that is usable for homes, resources, businesses. And due to that, it's a fairly poor county. I mean, they rely heavily on tourism, but as far as like a tax base, that kind of thing, they don't have a lot of money.
No, and they can't grow their tax base by getting new businesses to come, sell more real estate, more, people move in. They can't do that at the rate that most communities can. So there is really no room for growth for the most part.
So these are some of the modern problems with Swain County, but we're going to take you back to 1920.
Oh, I wonder what was happening in Swain County back then.
Well, it was a different setting, Dylan, because at that point in time, the national park had not been created, so the land was not being used for parkland, forest land. There were a lot of little small communities. You didn't have Fontana Lake, which actually drowned out some of the communities to build the lake, part of the Tennessee Valley Authority, their hydroelectric power. There was a railroad that kind of ran through. But, it was a really different environment than what we know as modern Swain County today, or modern Bryson City. Now, there's one story that I should mention about Rose's overzealous arrest of a man, to give you an idea of Holland Rose. When Rose tried to make an arrest, the wanted man slapped him in the face and then took off running. So Holland Rose went after him. Rose fell on his gun, which discharged accidentally, and that man lost his leg.
Oh, the Rose fell on his own gun?
And the wanted man lost his leg.
And he fired a shot and struck the wanted man.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this cost Rose his job as a deputy in the county. Now, in most cases, if a person runs from law enforcement, it's acceptable for said officer to shoot that person. We see that today, right? However, in the mountains, it was an unspoken expectation that the only reason you'd fire on a man under or like during an arrest would be in a matter of a dire situation, like your life was in danger. So for an officer to shoot someone was a really big deal and cost him his job.
Shoots a man that's running away. That's a kind of an unspoken rule. You don't do it. It's cowardly, I think is maybe how they might view it.
Possibly.
And so that's unfortunate if he truly did, fall on his weapon. Of course, he could be saying that because he knew he maybe shouldn't have shot the guy as he was running away. But, yeah, that's very unfortunate. But at the same time, what is this guy getting into? The guy that's running. You never know how dangerous he is.
It was after the passage of the Volstead Act, which was enacted in 1919 and took effect in 1920, that prohibited the sale and manufacture of alcoholic beverages, that Rose was appointed as a prohibition enforcement deputy in Swain County. Rose caused quite a stir, earning a reputation as a no-nonsense enforcer of the law. He made raids, captured still after still, and arrested nearly every bootlegger he came across, not to mention anyone who even had a flask of liquor in their possession.
Oh, my gosh.
It is speculated that he went beyond what was legal to procure such arrests.
Well, you have this deputy who's disgraced in a way, and I'm sure people have talked some shit about him around town. I'm sure he's heard rumors or someone talking, oh, he couldn't cut it, he couldn't hack it. And then all of a sudden, prohibition's, put upon the area. And he's like the main enforcer. He's been made the main enforcer, which is not going to be a popular position to be working in, right?
Federal man.
He's a federal tax revenuer, which is
essentially.
And he was not welcomed in that area. Not only the people who make the liquor, but the people who enjoy the liquor, who listen to the liquor, right, Randy?
And maybe just some folks who didn't really have a dog in the fight. Either way, they weren't liquor drinkers and they didn't, make the liquor or sell it. But they just felt like, give the guy a break. Who cares?
Right. I mean, is he really hurting anyone?
Exactly.
Sympathetic.
So Rose kept a meticulous pocket diary which accounted for his mileage traveled, witnesses, and every detail of his official work as a law enforcement officer. Many people in the community considered Rose's lust for obliterating lawlessness as an overreach. It was common knowledge in the community that Rose searched men without warrants.
Okay, well, that's illegal.
It is, Dylan. Rose's behavior was, for lack of better words, asshole-ish, right? Because many people began to just plain hate him.
Hey, Mr. Rose, you ever heard of that little piece of paper called the Constitution, sir? You can't trample on. Ain't you seen my flag? You see what it says, Mr. Rose? Don't tread on me, okay? And I'm not down with these no-knock search warrants either.
And there you go.
Yeah, even though we did give up some rights.
Don't shout the man down.
Even though we did give up some rights during 9/11. I don't agree with it.
People would say, quote, "It wouldn't surprise me any day to hear that Holland Rose had been killed." So I reckon you could say that Holland Rose was like cruising for a bruising.
Well, yeah, he's not no one like. I mean, I'm sure you had a close circle of friends and family that were like, hey, he's just doing his job, blah, blah, blah. But for the most part, like you said, even people without a dog in the fight, they're just like, oh, just leave that man alone. He ain't hurt nobody. And this guy's running roughshod all over the place, kicking ass, taking names. So I would think he's rather unpopular at this point.
Holland Rose admitted that he had never read the Constitution and seemed to have no concern over violating civil rights with illegal searches and seizures. When asked about it, Rose would simply say he was obeying orders.
Well, thanks for answering my question, you son of a bitch. You ain't read it.
Folks would say, quote, like, aren't you afraid of being ambushed or shot? And Rose would say the person would have to catch him from behind or from the bushes.
Oh, okay.
It was in October 1920 that Holland Rose, Charlie Beck, and Swain County Deputy J.M. Welch went to a man named Babe Burnett's house on Brush Creek in the early morning. A week before, Babe had attended the county fair, opting to stay at the Cooper House, the boarding house in town, where Rose resided. While there, Burnett complained to other guests about his apples. Although he had a good orchard, Babe was afraid the apples were going to waste because he wouldn't make enough money for his trouble of hauling them to the market. So he's got a whole bunch of really good apples, but he doesn't think he's going to make enough money if he sells them at the market.
I can know where this is going.
Now, Babe Burnett was a man of 60 who was described as tall, determined, and was a chatty Cathy. He was a man who really liked to talk.
That's how people describe me.
Sometime around 1915, Babe had gotten into an altercation with a postal delivery man, nearly killing him. Babe fled to Canada, then to Washington, where he stayed for 3 years. When the coast had cleared, Burnett returned to the mountains of western North Carolina, where his family had a farm. He often told folks he wished to sell the farm and relocate out west again. He really liked it out there. So this is a guy who's already got a violent background.
Right.
Right? When the officers arrived on October 25th at Babe's Brush Creek farm, Rose wanted to see barrels of pomace, which is essentially fruit pulp. Babe shows him this pomace he has in these barrels. Afterwards, Burnett drove some cattle from a cornfield to the foot of a mountain nearby, had some lunch, then loaded a sled with some roughage. So meanwhile, the officers have left the Burnett farm. Like, they've come, they've seen he has these barrels of apples, basically fruit pulp.
Yeah, well, I wonder if he's telling them what he intends to do with that.
So they see it, they leave. There are two versions of what happened next, Dylan. What we know for sure is that Welch stayed behind in the town of Bryson City, while Holland Rose and Charlie Beck came back to the Burnett farm. Now, the first version is that Holland Rose fired first on Babe Burnett. Yet, the defense's version will be that Burnett fired upon Holland Rose, and Holland Rose died. He died from gunshot wounds to the chest, just centered over his heart. A group was asked to help move Rose's body from down the mountain. He was placed on a sled with his hands tied so they wouldn't drag on the ground. Beck, who had witnessed the incident, was described as a man who had served in the Philippines and had been a prisoner of war. So upon his return home, they had tapped Charlie Beck to be a deputy because he was known for being able to take down bad men.
Yes, I have that same reputation.
Sounds like a real badass, this guy.
Yeah.
So typically, when Holland Rose went on a raid, he would carry a shotgun. But on this particular day, he only had a sidearm. When Rose asked Charlie Beck to accompany him out to Burnett's farm, Beck informed him he only had 8 cartridges left for his Winchester rifle. Rose soothed his concerns by saying, "I don't expect much trouble." So the men headed out to Brush Creek with only their sidearms. Now, Burnett's home was situated among the Alarka Mountains, which is very close to what is now Fontana Lake.
Yes, one of the docks are the Alarka boat dock.
Exactly.
Alarka Road.
Now, Rose had a hunch that Burnett was doing some distilling. They were shown the 2 barrels of fruit, which was in a state of fermentation. Some might call that mash.
Yeah, it sounds just like mash to me.
When Burnett showed the men his apple pomace, he explained he was planning to make some vinegar out of it. This is the conversation they had earlier in the day. During their conversation, Holland Rose told Burnett it's illegal to produce vinegar in such a way because the fermented apples had alcohol in it. Burnett allowed them to inspect another area of the orchard where they found 5 other barrels of fruit. Nearby, in what Rose thought was a still place, they found ashes in a furnace but no still. The 2 men, Rose and Beck, destroyed the pomace. And by the time they returned to the house, Burnett had already gone on with his daily chores. So at this point, if you remember, he's, out doing all his work. They go into town, come back. They're going to destroy this fruit that they had seen earlier. Whatever. Now, the officers departed Burnett's property and went on to search some of the other farms nearby, but still didn't find any evidence of liquor stills. So this is the second time they've come. They're destroying the fruit. Then they leave again. Go into the neighbor's house looking for a still. Because they think Burnett is going to make liquor with this.
They feel like there has to be a still set up somewhere nearby.
Yes. So it was later in the afternoon that Rose and Beck returned to the Burnett farm for a 3rd time to make an arrest. By now, Babe was in his corn crib unloading his corn fodder. And if you're not sure what corn fodder is, it's the part of the corn crop that you would feed to livestock. Like some people call it Indian corn.
Or silage?
Yes.
Okay.
Like the Indian corn that's the different colors.
Yeah.
It's not edible for
right.
human consumption, but it was what you'd feed your animals, right? And that seems to be the kind of corn he had in this corn crib. That's how it was described. So when Burnett saw the officers approaching, he took off on foot, realizing they were probably back to arrest him. Beck and Rose drew their pistols and began chasing after the farmer, Rose calling out for him to stop. When Rose ran around the corner of the barn, he was shot from a straw stack about 20 feet away.
So someone up in the barn, in the higher floor of the barn, shot him.
No, this is a straw stack, so it's just a big pile of straw.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Beck could not see who had fired the shot. He only saw the straw blown aside by the gun blast. Charlie Beck, could hear Holland Rose cry out, quote, "Babe, you've killed me." Then a moment later, he said, "I believe I'm rallying."
Okay. I love when people say awesome shit when they get shot.
Beck by now had gotten a little ahead of where Rose stood. He was immediately deafened by the sound of a gunshot that was within close range. When he turned to look back at Rose, he saw the officer slumping on the ground with his pistol raised, and he was just firing shots while struggling with death. It took Holland Rose about 2 to 3 minutes to die. Meanwhile, Charlie Beck was expecting to be shot at, so he watched for a person or perhaps a group of persons to pop up from this stack of straw. However, Burnett had quickly took off running once again. When Beck saw him, Burnett was nearly 75 yards away in some bushes described as waist high. Beck began firing at Babe Burnett, but he only had about 8 cartridges in his, because I guess at this point he's got his Winchester, I'm not sure.
So he's got his rifle out. He's only got limited bullets, but he's still trying to get a shot on Babe.
Yes. Doesn't work out for him. Now, Mrs. Burnett told Charlie Beck that her husband had not shot Holland Rose and that she had witnessed nothing. Beck then departed the Burnett property, scouring the neighborhood for anyone who might have a phone so that he could call the sheriff and let him know Holland Rose has been shot and killed. But no one offered to help. Burnett's neighbors didn't want to involve themselves, and honestly, many of them were sympathetic to the alleged bootleggers' plight.
Oh, there you go. You got a neighborhood. No one wants to cooperate. Everyone kind of thinks you shouldn't be there messing around at all.
No one wanted to be a witness in court. Beck had to fetch the sheriff by himself, leaving his dead comrade on the Burnett farm. He had to walk nearly 7 miles before he found a working telephone. That's a good distance.
Well, yeah, that's a good distance. And at the same time, he's witnessed this situation happen, traumatic. So, yeah, it's unfortunate he couldn't get help quicker.
He then walked back to the Burnett farm, which was now empty, and waited there for several hours until the sheriff arrived. Rose's body was finally transported to town in a truck around midnight. Several officers joined Charlie Beck at the Burnett house in order to assist them with the manhunt. By 3 a.m., reinforcements had arrived with some bloodhounds from Asheville, North Carolina. The dogs immediately took the posse up the mountain to a neighbor's house, which was about 3/4 of a mile away. The neighbor woman told the officers that Burnett had in fact staggered onto her property with a gunshot wound to his leg. She had dressed the wound with turpentine and wrapped it tightly to stop the bleeding. After this, the dog lost the scent, and some speculate it was because the turpentine had made its way down to Babe's feet, which prevented them from further tracing him, because it would have killed the scent.
Okay.
Now,
or he was left the property by vehicle. Would that do it?
I mean, possibly. Instead, Burnett was hiding out, and he spotted the men and the dogs near his hiding spot. So he slipped away, circled around them, and then came back to the place where he had been hiding originally.
What the hell?
So just ninja'd his way around.
Well, you got to assume he knows every inch of this land all around him. He knows the quickest, easiest ways to get places, and they don't, because I'm sure he grew up there.
Burnett managed to get out of the town for months on the run. Friends in a neighboring county helped him hide through the winter months until May. He had communications with an attorney during this time, and it was finally when his legal counsel advised Burnett to turn himself in that he surrendered himself to the sheriff. He was placed in jail until his trial in July. While awaiting trial, 2 other inmates escaped, but Burnett refused to join them on the lam. A lot of people wondered why Burnett would return to face a murder charge, but he had property, a whole farm there, and also he likely felt he would face leniency for the killing. Now, according to Keppert's book, Burnett's 2 sons returned from Idaho as soon as their father had gotten into trouble. Both boys stayed at the Cooper house, the boarding house. This is just an interesting little side note to the story. Holland Rose's daughter, Ima Rose, was described as a buxom beauty, and she happened to work at the Cooper house as a cook.
Wow. A buxom beauty.
A buxom beauty.
Okay.
Keppert said she was one of the prettiest girls he had seen in the mountains.
She is easy on the eyes.
Just plumb beautiful, Dylan.
Plumb beautiful.
Yeah, so she was probably like Jane Mansfield,
Yeah.
slopping around the boarding house. I don't know. Okay, so Verlin Burnett, Babe's son, was an ex-Marine, and he would have to face the daughter of the man his father had killed.
Yeah.
So this is an awkward situation, right?
This is weird.
And the townspeople lost their shit when Verlin and Ima fell in love.
What?
They ran off together.
There's no way.
One of Rose's relatives described as a man with a criminal record, threatened to kill Verlin if he didn't stop seeing Ima. But we know the heart wants what the heart wants. Verlin taught Ima to drive, and the next thing you know, they eloped. It was later reported they returned to the Alarka Mountains, both coming home with guns.
Dude, this is a very Romeo and Juliet kind of situation here with the, kind of, was it the Montagues and the Capulets?
Yes.
Yeah, so you have these two families obviously are not going to like each other for obvious reasons, and they done fell in love.
Now, this is kind of funny. Okay, Kepper was also living at the Cooper boarding house at this time. So he's witnessing all of this, and he's writing about it in his little book, right? Now, he reported around the time that the couple disappeared, that they done run off together.
OFT.
Yeah. So did his suitcase.
Oh.
Right? And some months later, his suitcase happened to reappear at the door of his room with 3 half-gallon fruit jars of white liquor inside.
Nice.
Yeah. So that at that point, he was kind of like, okay, do I turn this into the law, to the law? Do I keep, what do I do?
You
But
keep it.
He basically drank it.
You keep it.
Yeah.
You drink it.
He did. Though you might expect Rose's murder to be tried in federal court, that was not the case. Federal courts had no jurisdiction in murder cases. So Burnett would instead be tried in state court. On July 28th of 1921 in Swain County, North Carolina, the trial commenced for J.E. Burnett in the murder of James Holland Rose. A grand jury had twice refused to send in a true bill of indictment. Finally, under court pressure, they relented. So the third, I guess 3 times the charm, right? So the third time they had a grand jury, they finally indicted him.
Well, there you go. He is getting that sympathetic ear of the community, right?
A jury was secured the following day and trial began. Charlie Beck was the only eyewitness for the state, and he admitted on stand that neither he nor Rose had a warrant. This was a sticking point for the defense. Now, Burnett took the stand in his own defense, and he admitted his intention was to make brandy with the apples, but told the jury someone had stolen his still. Because remember, he's got the furnace, but no still. I mean, who just randomly steals a man's still?
Well, it seemed like he had all the ingredients, the wherewithal to make it, the knowledge to make it, and it just didn't have a still. So maybe someone really did steal his still.
Then, to keep the apples from going to waste, he prepared it to make vinegar. He was unaware he was violating any law by making vinegar in this particular way. He said after working in his field on the morning of the shooting, Babe Burnett found the officers on his property. Rose informed him, "I'm a revenue officer and I'm hunting down your whiskey," but that one of the officers had not served him, like none of the officers served him with any kind of warrant. None of them. Burnett admitted to voluntarily allowing the men to search his property. He even directed them to more barrels of pomace in the orchard because he had nothing to hide. He was, after all, making vinegar with the apples. He even said the officers were over near his old still place and saw where it stood, but the men didn't arrest him at that point either. And he even told them, like, someone stole my still, so I don't have one. Now, instead, they leave, and Burnett continues on with his farm chores. Now, Burnett swore that he was merely moving his cattle to keep them from trampling the crops. He had no intention of running or avoiding arrest. So the first time they were there, if they saw him, moving these cattle, it was not like an attempt to run away.
Oh, so it's like get the cattle to another safer spot so he could take off.
Yeah, that's kind of what they, may have thought. But he's like, that's not what happened. I'm just doing my chores here. I don't want them to trample on my crops.
Hey, stay off my crops.
He testified that when he was in the corn crib, Rose and Beck came at him with pistols drawn. As he took off, Rose fired a shot which hit him in the leg. He had a shotgun in the straw stack from squirrel hunting earlier that morning, like very early in the morning. So he ducked down and grabbed that gun. Rose was still pointing his pistol as he drew near Burnett, so he fired at the agent. In Burnett's mind, it was the only way he could save himself. He then said that Charlie Beck shot at him several more times, so that's when he takes off on foot running. His wife testified one of the agents had fired at her husband as he went toward the barn from the corn crib. She heard no one make a call to her husband, "You need to stop. We've got a warrant for your arrest." Nothing like that.
She heard nothing.
She heard nothing but shots. The prosecution claimed that Burnett was making secret shots at the officers. There was no self-defense argument here. This is just a man who hid in the straw stack and is shooting at these innocent police officers. And at the time of the killing, the Lever Act was in place, which prohibited an anti-wartime profiteering and food conservation statute, which made it a felony to ferment fruit or grains.
Okay.
Okay, so therefore, they argued officers had a right to make an arrest without a warrant. Now, the judge overseeing this trial agreed the Lever Act was in effect. Most of the jury stood firm for an acquittal, but on the third day of deliberations, a verdict was returned for murder in the second degree. Babe Burnett was sentenced to 12 years in state prison at hard labor. However, the state Supreme Court ruled in 1921 that Holland Rose was not charged with enforcing the Lever Act. Rose had no power of arrest without a warrant. They also stated that at the time, after review of the evidence, it was pretty clear that Burnett was not operating an illicit distillery, as he didn't even have a still on the property.
Wow, that's a bombshell ruling there.
Instead, the man was doing farm chores in a corn crib when threatened by two officers who had no legal right to be there.
So whether or not he had fermenting fruit, which he was going to make vinegar out, apple cider vinegar, I guess.
Yes.
Whether his ignorance of the law wouldn't help him there if he didn't know you're not supposed to do that, according to the Lever Act, right? But it sounds like Hall had no authority to invoke the Lever Act and make an arrest. So basically, Hall's trying to take him into custody, but he has no clear reason to be doing that, correct?
Yes.
Which in turn could be argued, I'm sure, that Bay was in his rights to defend himself at that point.
Yes, because this is an illegal raid of his property.
Okay, this is a sticky situation.
And these officers have destroyed his fruit.
Right.
They're on the property, no warrant. He's volunteered, like, here, I'll show you.
Let them look around multiple times that day. This was the third or fourth time they'd been there, right?
Yes. So they had opportunity to arrest the first time, the second time they were there, but then they come back a third time, draw guns, trying to shoot at this guy. So he shot the officer and killed him.
Okay.
That's the story. That's it, Dylan.
Well, I must say it sounds like Mr. Rose there I'm not going to say overreaching, but maybe this was a battle he didn't have to fight that day, given the circumstances, you know what I mean? I mean, whether or not he didn't really find evidence of distilled liquors or the equipment to do that, maybe some of the materials to make it, but I mean, he could have went on about his business and maybe kept that guy in mind. I might come double check you later, or keep my ear to the ground if I hear anything else. But I think he really didn't have to do that day. What do you think?
No. If anything, Dylan, I think that Rose was, in a sense, a victim as well, because he was not fully educated by the higher powers on the legalities of his job.
Oh, wow. That's a good point.
He just was told, you need to enforce these orders and obey these orders. You need to do this. But they didn't educate him on the Constitution, that you have to have an arrest warrant. So he's carrying out these orders by higher-ups that have never fully educated him or trained him on basics of the Constitution.
Well, and that's interesting. That's a very good point. Having been a deputy for some time before being this enforcement agent, it's very surprising that we'd never had at least a 30-minute conversation about people's rights in the Constitution, right? I mean,
It's
that's
a different time, I guess.
that's certainly problematic, I would think. But hey, honestly, it happens nowadays. You have these younger men and women becoming officers to serve and protect their community the best way they see fit. But sometimes they don't know basic law and basic rights, it seems. So yeah, I guess maybe that tradition's carrying on. We don't have to look at the Constitution.
So, just to give you a little background on James Holland Rose, I couldn't find because this is a very old murder. And according to newspapers, there's a lot about the trial, but there's not a whole lot about his life. So, I couldn't really dive into him other than just what has been written about him. But he was born in 1875 in Swain County. He was married to a woman named Mary, and he left behind 7 children.
I married Mary.
He married a Mary Rose and left behind 7 children. One of them done run offed
With
the Burnett boy.
the Burnett boy.
Yeah,
What's the odds of that?
I don't know.
Wow. Star-crossed lovers.
But just a very quirky mountain moonshine murder story.
Well, I think it had all the elements there. Like they're pointing out, the community was sympathetic with Mr. Burnett for the most part, and they didn't really like people messing around their property and stuff and telling them what they could and couldn't do with said property. And I feel like that kind of attitude still lives on to this day in our area and in that area there.
With true mountain folks, it
with
does.
true mountain folks.
Not the outlanders who move here.
Right. Because a lot of people don't know these stories of and there's some people that don't realize this is their history. This is how it went, and they would not be so quick to just
Back
give
the blue?
well, it's just about giving away your rights.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what it boils down to. And we gave away a lot of rights, after 9/11. They did some things they've been trying to do for decades. And we still see people being abused with that to this day. The no knock, no whatever warrants are very dangerous. People have been killed doing that. They've went into the wrong homes. I mean, just the idea that I'm going to kick your door in, not announce myself, not say police, not have to have a warrant per se, and then expect that's going to turn out well is just dumb in my book. Because if I'm sitting there and I do have a firearm at hand and my door comes flying in, I'm subject to pull that gun up and start firing because I think it's a home invasion.
Well, there was a very disappointing story several years ago out of Franklin, North Carolina, which is only, about 40 minutes west of us where we live, where a fella had, I believe, called law enforcement, had some issue with neighbors. There were some squabbles with these neighbors, and this had been kind of going on. He thinks that the neighbors are on his property. He has a gun in his house. This cop shows up, no lights on, just creeping up on this guy's property, sees him in the house with this gun, gets out of his car, is sort of, creeping around in the dark outside this man's house, ends up shooting the guy.
Yeah, like through the window or some shit.
Yes, killing him.
Right.
The man in his own home with his own weapon in his own house, because he felt threatened. And, of course, there were no charges filed against this officer.
I mean, how dumb is that on the officer's part to come and you already know there's some kind of a situation going on here between neighbors and creeping around in the dark? I mean, it's just, it's goofy.
And the man's wife, daughter were like in the home. They were like, he honestly thought this was like an intruder. That's why he had a gun, and then gets shot through the window.
See, there you go.
And it was like a rookie officer who had really only been on the job for like 6 months. And of course gets, look, a little slap on the wrist and is back out there when, the dude had no business like creeping up with no lights on and shit. It was not a situation where he couldn't have announced himself.
Yeah, just announce yourself, see what happens. Yeah, I don't see how that would make you safer, sidling up and creeping around in the dark. I don't know how you think that would make you safer.
Because it doesn't.
That's how
because
dark
it
works.
Doesn't make you safer.
Yeah, and so then you have a family affected by someone's poor judgment. And then at the same time, it seems that that person with the poor judgment that caused the situation does not have to pay for their part in that. And that's very sad. Oh, my gosh.
Well, this has been the Moonshine murder of Holland Rose.
That's right. You keep them jugs a flowing, and you keep them revenuers off my property. Okay?
I think the real lesson that we learn here from mountain people, Dylan, mind your business.
Mind your business.
Mind your own business.
That's right.
We like to mind our own business. We don't want to know what our neighbor's doing. We don't want to be involved in it.
I don't care what my neighbors do.
I think for the most part, we as a culture, we like to be left alone. And yeah, we don't want people poking their nose in our business. We're not going to be poking our nose in other people's business.
No, it's do whatever you want as long as you don't harm others or bother others, right? That's what we live by here
And
at
let's
Mountain
be
Murders.
honest, Prohibition was like one of the dumbest bunches of shit we ever did in American history. I mean, come on.
Humankind has been fermenting fruits and stuff to, achieve alcohol in some form or fashion as long as we've been around, right? And I'm sure at first they would just stumble upon, some fermented fruit on the ground and just realize when you mash this together and consume it, you feel funny. But I mean, we've been doing that as old as humans.
You feel funny, huh?
You feel funny. And all of a sudden, that old cave girl in the cave next door looks pretty damn good because you got your fermented fruit goggles on.
Fermented fruit
I'm
goggles.
going to get you some of that.
My goodness.
No, but I mean, that's an age-old technique, and humans are going to continue to do it. And I don't know. It's stupid. And it's all about the damn taxes. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I mean, when they come over on the boats, they were allowed, you were allowed to make this for yourself and family and friends, correct? I'm pretty sure on that it was okay to make distilled spirits for yourself and friends and family. And, of course, people abuse that, want to sell it for huge profits. And why can't I just pay my taxes?
Well, as we've discussed on our previous Moonshine murder, which was of Lewis Redmond, it was the story of Lewis Redmond, we mentioned that one of the primary reasons that many Appalachian folks, Southern folks, were, in fact, moonshining and bootlegging was simply to pay the taxes. Because after the Civil War, they were left bankrupt, didn't have money, their crops got burned, their property seized. So a lot of folks were bootlegging in order to pay the taxes so that they could keep some bit of their family farm.
Yeah, right, to pay their property taxes.
Yep.
So there you go.
Okay, Dylan, anything else?
No, that is it. And I found we will discuss at length more about the lethal injection situation there in South Carolina. Found some really great articles.
The firing squad?
Yeah, the firing squads. We'll talk more about that in the midweek. And other than that, I want to thank Heather for this wonderful, interesting story.
It's probably a little disconjointed. I'm sorry. My head is in a different space right now.
She's a little foggy.
It's called the I need a nap space. But
Well, I think that's going to be okay. I'm going to go put her to bed.
you can email us, mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com, if you have a case suggestion or you want to weigh in on what's going on in South Carolina. We would, of course, love to hear from you. And if you would like more content, check out patreon.com/mountainmurderspodcast. Have a good evening, Dylan. You just going to stare at me?
Bye, Heather. I'm going to go put her to bed.